Hi guys, I'm Bobsi, and in this video I'm going to show you how you work with broadcasting in PurrNet. Now first of all, broadcasting is essentially just a way that allows you to send data without needing to work through a network identity. So in this case I have a script that I just called test that is a mono behavior. Now the script I've put just in the scene, it's just on a test game object with the test script. You can see there's really nothing special with it, and again you could also put this on players, do whatever you want, and of course you can also broadcast in network identities. But when you're already in the network identity, I would argue it's a lot easier to just use an RPC. Now, let me show you how broadcasting works, as you could stumble upon some cases where you might need to send data without wanting it to be a network identity. So first things first, in order to broadcast, when you do broadcast, you have to send some data. Often, and pretty much always, you want to make some struct of data. So I'm just going to make like a private struct, and this is just going to be my test data. You can call it whatever you want. And it's a good idea to have that inherit from iPacked auto, which is in the PurrNet packing namespace. Now this essentially just ensures that it gets packed correctly, as this doesn't necessarily happen automatically when it's just a mono behavior. Next thing, we want to send some data. Now let me just do, for example, a public integer. This will be my int. We can do a public bool. We can call it my bool, something like that. That should be fine. And now let's also just have a way of defining them in editor. So we can do private, actually, yeah, let's just serialize the data. So let's do test data, and then that's the data to send. Let's call it data to send. And let's also just make this system.serializable so we can actually draw an editor. So now if we go look in our Unity editor here, we should now be able to see the data to send here, and as you can see, we can modify it. So I think that's a good way to test. Now let's set up the actual broadcasting. So first of all, let's go into our onEnable and onDisable methods. So let me open these up. Like so. And essentially we want to get the network manager, which you can easily do through, for example, the instance handler.network manager. You could also just, serialize it and set it as a reference, but in my case, I'm just going to do this. And then we can call that subscribe. And now you can choose to use one of the two overrides. You can either have a bit more control. Let me get this back up again. You can choose to have a bit more control with the as server way, where you can essentially, choose who gets and receives what and so on. But essentially in my case, I'm just going to use the one without the as server, because then we can broadcast to everyone, whether you're a server, a client, or whatever. So in this case, let me just make a callback, and I'm going to call this, let's say, on data received, something like that. And we're going to make this a generic method because we want to make sure that it sends the type of our test data. And essentially down here, same deal, but we just write unsubscribe. But pretty easy as that. And now we can auto populate this. Most IDEs can do it. For example, I use Writer, so I can just hold Alt and Enter. I'm pretty sure Visual Studio can do the same thing. And we can create the method of onDataReceived here. And as you can see, when you do create the method, it essentially needs 3 parameters in here. It needs the player ID. This is whoever sent it or where it comes from. Then that we have the test data, which is obviously the data struct that we made. And then we have a bool of whether we are receiving this as a server or not. So in our case, just to show you that it works, I'm just going to do debug.log, and then let's say received data, and then let's just do the data.toString like this, for example. And then down here we can pretty easily just override the toString. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a pretty handy thing so that you can choose exactly what you return. So in our case, whenever we do data.toString, we'll just get out this string right here. Now this should be pretty easy, and now all we have to do is essentially to send the data, right? So essentially now we've subscribed to receiving the data. We unsubscribe again when we leave, and for that sake, it's probably a good idea to always just check that the network manager actually exists when you do indeed unsubscribe, just as a little bit of a safety measure. And now essentially whenever data is sent that's supposed to reach us, we will get within this method right here. So now let's set up how we send it. That's also very easy. So going inside the update method, I'll do an if input.getKeyDown. Let's, for example, do keycode. Let me do q, something like that. And now we want to figure out how and when we send the data. Now there's different calls. So let me just show you the network manager dot. And as you can see, there's a few. There's send, which can send to specific players. There's send to all, send to scene, send to server. These are essentially the relevant ones here. Be aware that the send to server is the only one I believe that the clients can call, and the rest of them are essentially called by the server. So what we can do is we can make an if statement above here, say if instance handler the network manager, and then we can check if we are the server, then we want to do one thing, and if we're not the server, then we want to do another thing, like so. So I can put this inside of here. And so when we are not the server, we just essentially want to send our data to the server. And when we are the server, let's say we can do whatever we want, but let's say that we want to send it to everyone. Yeah, so we can do send to all. That'll essentially send it out to all, which includes ourselves in a case of a host setup, and also the other client. So now depending on who presses Q, it changes who will receive it. And now you could of course do something. Let's say you want the data to always reach everybody. You could do something, for example, if we are the server here when we do receive the data, and it doesn't come from us or something like that, then you can send it out to everybody. But for my sake, I'm just going to do this just so you can see the different methods and ways of communicating. It's very similar in idea. You'll very quickly hopefully recognize it very similar to RPCs. So this is essentially a server RPC, this is the observer's RPC, and for that sake the normal send is the client RPC, right? So the one that is just called .send, that's the client RPC, because there you also have to feed it a player, or for that sake a list of players. And yeah, that's really about it. So now let's go into our game here. Let's of course make sure that it is in the scene. I'm going to make sure that I've saved the scene so that my other client also has it. And I'm going to start it up here and start it up here. And now as you can see here, I have my client here. If I press Q, you can see we will send it with the received data of 0 and false. And now of course if I go and I change it, so let's go and change it here, data to send, let's say I want to send 69, I want to set the bool to true. And you can see now when I press Q, that's the data that we're sending to the server. And now you can see when the server presses Q, let's do 420 and the bool is false. When I press Q, you can see the server also gets it because it's sent to all. But you can see the client now also got this because it came from the server and he can send it to everyone. So it's really that easy. Working with broadcasts is generally very simple. So hopefully this makes sense. Again, for the most cases, I'll say you can just work with RPCs. They'll generally be simpler and they have more functionality. But in case you do reach a point where you don't want it to be a network identity, you just want to stay with mono behavior, this is a good way to work with it. So let me know in the comment section if you have any other questions, any other topics I should cover, or if something wasn't clear. Other than that, it would be awesome if you'd leave a like, comment and subscribe, and I just hope that you have a wonderful day.